Madam Speaker, I seek recognition for a question of personal privilege.
The chair has been made aware of the valid base for the gentlewoman's point of personal privilege. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would also like to thank many of my colleagues for the opportunity to not only speak today, but for the many members from both sides of the aisle who have reached out to me in support following an incident earlier this week. About 2 days ago, I was walking up the steps of the Capitol when Representative Yoho suddenly turned a corner, and he was accompanied by Representative Roger Williams, and accosted me on the steps right here in front of our nation's Capitol. I was minding my own business, walking up the steps, and Representative Yoho put his finger in my face. He called me disgusting. He called me crazy. He called me out of my mind. And he called me dangerous. And then he took a few more steps, and after I had recognized his comments as rude, he walked away and said, "I'm rude. You're calling me rude." I took a few steps ahead and I walked inside and cast my vote. Because my constituents send me here each and every day to fight for them and to make sure that they are able to keep a roof over their head, that they're able to feed their families, that they're able to carry their lives with dignity. I walked back out, and there were reporters in the front of the Capitol, and in front of reporters, Representative Yoho called me, and I quote, "a fucking bitch." These are the words that Representative Yoho levied against a congresswoman, the congresswoman that not only represents New York's 14th congressional district, but every congresswoman and every woman in this country, because all of us have had to deal with this in some form, some way, some shape, at some point in our lives. And I want to be clear that Representative Yoho's comments were not deeply hurtful or piercing to me, because I have worked a working class job. I have waited tables in restaurants. I have ridden the subway. I have walked the streets in New York City. And this kind of language is not new. I have encountered words uttered by Mr. Yoho and men uttering the same words as Mr. Yoho while I was being harassed in restaurants. I have tossed men out of bars that have used language like Mr. Yoho's. And I have encountered this type of harassment riding the subway in New York City. This is not new, and that is the problem. Mr. Yoho was not alone. He was walking shoulder to shoulder with Representative Roger Williams. And that's when we start to see that this issue is not about one incident. It is cultural. It is a culture of lack of impunity, of accepting of violence and violent language against women, and an entire structure of power that supports that. Because not only have I been spoken to disrespectfully, particularly by members of the Republican Party and elected officials in the Republican Party, not just here, but the President of the United States last year told me to go home to another country, with the implication that I don't even belong in America. The governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, before I even was sworn in, called me a whatever that is. Dehumanizing language is not new. And what we are seeing is that incidents like these are happening in a pattern. This is a pattern of an attitude towards women and dehumanization of others. So while I was not deeply hurt or offended by little comments that are made, when I was reflecting on this, I honestly thought that I was just going to pack it up and go home. It's just another day, right? But then yesterday, Representative Yoho decided to come to the floor of the House of Representatives and make excuses for his behavior. And that I could not let go. I could not allow my nieces, I could not allow the little girls that I go home to, I could not allow victims of verbal abuse and worse to see that excuse and to see our Congress accept it as legitimate and accept it as an apology and to accept silence as a form of acceptance. I could not allow that to stand, which is why I am rising today to raise this point of personal privilege. And I do not need Representative Yoho to apologize to me. Clearly, he does not want to. Clearly, when given the opportunity, he will not. And I will not stay up late at night waiting for an apology from a man who has no remorse over calling women and using abusive language towards women. But what I do have issue with is using women, our wives and daughters, as shields and excuses for poor behavior. Mr. Yoho mentioned that he has a wife and 2 daughters. I am 2 years younger than Mr. Yoho's youngest daughter. I am someone's daughter too. My father, thankfully, is not alive to see how Mr. Yoho treated his daughter. My mother got to see Mr. Yoho's disrespect on the floor of this house towards me on television. And I am here because I have to show my parents that I am their daughter and that they did not raise me to accept abuse from men. Now, what I am here to say is that this harm that Mr. Yoho tried to levy against me was not just an incident directed at me. But when you do that to any woman, what Mr. Yoho did was give permission to other men to do that to his daughters. He gave, in using that language in front of the press, he gave permission to use that language against his wife, his daughters, women in his community. And I am here to stand up to say that is not acceptable. I do not care what your views are. It does not matter how much I disagree or how much it incenses me or how much I feel that people are dehumanizing others. I will not do that myself. I will not allow people to change and create hatred in our hearts. And so what I believe is that having a daughter does not make a man decent. Having a wife does not make a decent man. Treating people with dignity and respect makes a decent man. And when a decent man messes up, as we all are bound to do, he tries his best and does apologize. Not to save face, not to win a vote. He apologizes genuinely to repair and acknowledge the harm done so that we can all move on. Lastly, what I want to express to Mr. Yoho is gratitude. I want to thank him for showing the world that you can be a powerful man and accost women. You can have daughters and accost women without remorse. You can be married and accost women. You can take photos and project an image to the world of being a family man and accost women without remorse and with a sense of impunity. It happens every day in this country. It happened here on the steps of our nation's capital. It happens when individuals who hold the highest office in this land admit hurting women and using this language against all of us. But once again, I thank my colleagues for joining us today. I will reserve the hour of my time, and I will yield to my colleagues, Representative Jayapal of Washington. Thank you. Thank you to my colleague from New York, Representative Espaillat, for holding this incredibly important hour on not just the climate crisis, but the Green New Deal in particular. And as I was preparing for this evening, I would be remiss but to say that last night we had a national Democratic debate and not a single question was asked about our climate crisis. Right now, the global consensus, the IPCC report coming out of the UN, is sounding the alarm on what will happen if we do not keep emissions down to contain our warming levels below 1.5 degrees Celsius. But if you look at today, we are on track to hit 3 degrees Celsius by 2100. This can bring unprecedented chaos to our order. But throughout this entire year, as we've discussed the Green New Deal, I've noticed that there's been an awful lot of misinformation about what is inside this resolution. A tremendous amount of wild claims, everything from saying we're seeking to ban airplanes to ending ice cream. And as a consequence, I've realized that many of my colleagues have never even read the resolution that they're speaking on. They haven't opened a single word of it. And it's actually only about, I have it right in front of me, just 14 pages long. So I have decided that since my colleagues, some of my colleagues across the aisle, could not, for some reason, read the resolution, that perhaps this hour would be spent best reading it to them for the public record. And so today what I would like to do is to read the Green New Deal resolution for all those who are interested, who may want to fire this up on C-SPAN, or who may want to sit in the audience today. Resolution on H-Res 109, recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal. Whereas the October 2018 report entitled Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the November 2018 Fourth National Climate Assessment Report found that 1, human activity is the dominant cause of observed climate change over the past century. 2, a changing climate is causing sea levels to rise, and an increase in wildfires, severe storms, droughts, and other extreme weather events that threaten human life, healthy communities, and critical infrastructure. 3, global warming at or above 2 degrees Celsius beyond pre-industrialized levels will cause a mass migration from the regions most affected by climate change. B, more than $500 billion in lost annual economic output in the United States by the year 2100. C, wildfires that by 2050 will annually burn at least twice as much forest area in the western United States than was typically burned by wildfires in the years preceding 2019. D, a loss of more than 99% of all coral reefs on Earth. E, more than 350 million more people to be exposed globally to deadly heat stress by 2050. And F, a risk of damage to $1 trillion of public infrastructure and coastal real estate in the United States. And 4, global temperatures must be kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrialized levels to avoid the most severe impacts of a changing climate, which will require A, global reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from human sources of 40 to 60% from 2010 levels by 2030, and B, net zero global emissions by 2050. Whereas because the United States has historically been responsible for a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions, having emitted 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions through 2014, and has a high technological capacity. The United States must take a leading role in reducing emissions through economic transformation. Whereas the United States is currently experiencing several related crises, with one, life expectancy declining while basic needs such as clean air, clean water, healthy food, and adequate health care, housing, transportation, and education are inaccessible to a significant portion of the U.S. population. Two, a 4-decade trend of wage stagnation, deindustrialization, and anti-labor policies that has led to A, hourly wages overall stagnating since the 1970s despite increased worker productivity. B, the third worst level of socioeconomic mobility in the developed world before the Great Recession. And C, the erosion of earning and bargaining power of workers in the United States, and D, inadequate resources for public sector workers to confront the challenges of climate change at local, state, and federal levels, and 3, the greatest income inequality since the 1920s, with A, the top 1% of earners accruing 91% of gains in the first few years of economic recovery after the Great Recession. B, a large racial wealth divide amounting to a difference of 20 times more wealth between the average white family and the average black family. And C, a gender earnings gap that results in women earning approximately 80% as much as men at the median. Whereas climate change, pollution, and environmental destruction have exacerbated systemic racial, regional, social, environmental, and economic injustices, referred to in this preamble as systematic injustices, by disproportionately affecting indigenous peoples, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth, referred to in this preamble as frontline and vulnerable communities. Whereas climate change constitutes a direct threat to the national security of the United States, one, by impacting economic, environmental, and social stabilities of countries and communities around the world, and two, by acting as a threat multiplier. Whereas the federal government-led mobilizations during World War II and the Green New Deal created the New Deal, created the middle class that the United States, the biggest middle class the United States has ever seen, but many members of frontline and vulnerable communities were excluded from many of the economic and societal benefits of those mobilizations. And whereas the House of Representatives recognizes that a new national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization on a scale not seen since World War II and the New Deal era is a historic opportunity. One, to create millions of good, high-wage jobs in the United States. Two, to provide unprecedented levels of prosperity and economic security for all peoples of the United States. And three, to counteract systemic injustices. Now, therefore, be it resolved that it is the sense of the House of Representatives that, one, it is the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal. A, to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a fair and just transition for all communities and workers. B, to create millions of good, high-wage jobs and ensure prosperity and economic security for all people in the United States. C, to invest in the infrastructure and industry of the United States to sustainably meet the challenges of the 21st century. D, to secure for all people of the United States for generations to come, 1, clean water, 2, climate and community resiliency, 3, healthy food, 4, access to nature, and 5, a sustainable environment, and E, to promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing historic oppression of indigenous peoples, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth, referred to in this resolution as frontline and vulnerable communities. 2, the goals described in subparagraphs A through E of paragraph 1, referred to in this resolution as the Green New Deal goals, should be accomplished through a 10-year national mobilization, referred to in this resolution as the Green New Deal mobilization, that will require the following goals and projects. A, building resiliency against climate change-related disasters, such as extreme weather, including by leveraging funding and providing investments for community-defined projects and strategies. B, repairing and upgrading the infrastructure in the United States, including 1, by eliminating pollution and greenhouse gas emissions as much as technologically feasible. 2, by guaranteeing universal access to clean water. 3, by reducing the risks posed by climate impacts, and 4, by ensuring that any infrastructure bill considered by Congress addresses climate change. C, meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources, including 1, by dramatically expanding and upgrading renewable power sources, and B, by deploying new capacity. D, building or upgrading energy-efficient, distributed, and smart power grids, and ensuring affordable access to electricity. E, upgrading all existing buildings in the United States and building new buildings to achieve maximum energy efficiency, water efficiency, safety, affordability, comfort, and durability, including through electrification. F, spurring massive growth in clean manufacturing in the United States and removing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from manufacturing and industry as much as is technologically feasible, including by expanding renewable energy manufacturing and investing in existing manufacturing and industry. G, working collaboratively with farmers and ranchers in the United States to remove pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector as much as is technologically feasible, including 1, by supporting family farming, and 2, by investing in sustainable farming and land use practices that increase soil health, and 3, by building a more sustainable food system that ensures universal access to healthy food. H, overhauling transportation systems in the United States to remove pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector as much as technologically feasible, including through investment in 1, zero-emission vehicle infrastructure and manufacturing, 2, clean, affordable, and accessible public transit, and 3, high-speed rail. I, mitigating and managing the long-term adverse health, economic, and other effects of pollution and climate change, including by providing funding for community-defined projects and strategies. J, removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and reducing pollution by restoring natural ecosystems through proven low-tech solutions that increase soil carbon storage, such as land preservation and afforestation. K, restoring and protecting threatened, endangered, and fragile ecosystems through locally appropriate and science-based projects that enhance biodiversity and support climate resiliency. L, cleaning up existing hazardous waste and abandoned sites, ensuring economic development and sustainability to those sites. M, identifying other emission and pollution sources and creating solutions to remove them, and N, promoting international exchange of technology, expertise, products, funding, and services with the aim of making the United States the international leader on climate action and to help other countries achieve a Green New Deal. 3, a Green New Deal must be developed through transparent and inclusive consultation, collaboration, and partnership with frontline and vulnerable communities, labor unions, worker cooperatives, civil society groups, academia, and businesses. And 4, to achieve the Green New Deal goals and mobilization, a Green New Deal will require the following goals and projects. A, providing and leveraging in a way that ensures the public receives appropriate ownership stakes and returns on investment, adequate capital through community grants, public banks, and other public financing, technical expertise, supporting policies and other forms of assistance to communities, organizations, federal, state, and local government agencies, and businesses working on the Green New Deal mobilization. B, ensuring that the federal government takes into account the complete environmental and social costs and impacts of emissions through 1, existing laws, 2, new policies and programs, and 3, ensuring that frontline and vulnerable communities shall not be adversely affected. C, providing resources, training, and high-quality education, including higher education, to all people of the United States, with a focus on frontline and vulnerable communities, so that all people of the United States may be full and equal participants in the Green New Deal mobilization. D, making public investments in the research and development of new clean and renewable energy technologies and industries. E, directing investments to spur economic development, deepen and diversify industries and businesses in local and regional economies, and build wealth and community ownership, while prioritizing high-quality job creation and economic, social, and environmental benefits in frontline and vulnerable communities and deindustrialized communities that may otherwise struggle with the transition away from greenhouse gas-intensive industries. F, ensuring the use of democratic and participatory processes that are inclusive of and led by frontline and vulnerable communities and workers to plan, implement, and administer the Green New Deal mobilization at the local level. G, ensuring that the Green New Deal mobilization creates high-quality union jobs that pay prevailing wages, hire local workers, offer training and advancement opportunities, and guarantees wage and benefit parities for workers affected by that transition. H, guaranteeing a job with a family-sustaining wage, adequate family and medical leave, paid vacations, and retirement security to all people of the United States. I, strengthening and protecting the right of all workers to organize, unionize, and collectively bargain free of coercion, intimidation, and harassment. J, strengthening and enforcing labor, workplace health and safety, anti-discrimination, and wage and hour standards across all employers, industries, and sectors. K, enacting and enforcing trade rules, procurement standards, and border adjustments with strong labor and environmental protections. I, to stop the transfer of jobs and pollution overseas, and 1, to stop the transfer of jobs and pollution overseas, and 2, to grow domestic manufacturing in the United States. L, ensuring that public lands, waters, and oceans are protected and that eminent domain is not abused. M, obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples for all decisions that affect Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories, honoring all treaties and agreements with Indigenous peoples, and protecting and enforcing the sovereignty and land rights of Indigenous peoples. N, ensuring a commercial environment where every business person is free from unfair competition and domination by domestic or international monopolies. And O, providing all people of the United States with high-quality health care, affordable, safe, and adequate housing, economic security, and clean water, clean air, healthy and affordable food, and access to nature. That is every word in the Green New Deal. And I want every person in this body and across the country to ask themselves why this is so controversial. Why is health care for every American so controversial? Why is protecting our planet for the next generation so controversial? Why is dignified labor and protections at work so controversial? Why is taking on the fossil fuel industry so controversial? Because for years, we have prioritized the pursuit of profit at any and all human and environmental cost. And I humbly ask my colleagues and my country to question our priorities for once, because our priorities have led to an unprecedented amount of income inequality, to millions of people living in poverty, and many more that feel unstable in their economic life. So please, as a moral, economic, and political prerogative, I humbly ask our country to care for our planet. Thank you very much, and I yield. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to present this amendment by opening with the stance of the U.S. Marine Corps, which is that war is not a game. The Marine Service, and quoting the Marines, the Marine Service brand and issues associated with combat are too serious to be gamified in a responsible manner. Now, this amendment is specifically to block recruitment practices and funding for recruitment practices on platforms such as Twitch.tv, which are live streaming platforms that are largely populated by children well under the age of military recruitment rules. Children as young as 13 and oftentimes as young as 12 are targeted for recruitment forms that can be filled online. This amendment is in direct alignment with both those values, but also the values that children should not be targeted in general for many marketing purposes in addition to military service. And I think it's extraordinarily important, especially when it comes to emerging technology platforms, that intervention be taken extraordinarily seriously. Because once these lights are turned on, it's very difficult to roll them back. Right now, currently, children on platforms such as Twitch are bombarded with banner ads that link to recruitment sign-up forms that can be submitted by children as young as 12 years old. These are not educational outreach programs, but recruitment forms for the military. A Twitter account for the U.S. Army esports team linked to a page with, quote, "register to win" at the top, no details on what one could even win, and a sign-up form that, according to a tiny disclosure at the bottom of the page, consents to contact by an Army recruiter, again allowing people as young as 12 years old to submit this form. Viewers on the Army's Twitch channel are repeatedly presented with an automated prompt that says they could win an Xbox Elite Series 2 controller that costs upwards of $200 and a link where they can enter the, quote, giveaway. It too directs them to a recruitment form with no additional mention of a contest odds, total number of winners, or when a drawing will occur. Again, it's extraordinarily important that we approach and study emerging technologies, including live streaming, which is a platform that is exploding in youth, particularly among young people. And when it comes to issues of technology, I believe that we should act with reservation and caution first, rather than entering with both feet in and then trying to undo damage that could potentially be done. That's why I believe that we should, again, restrain and restrict ourselves from explicit recruitment tactics, not others, but recruitment specifically on platforms that children are using to play games like Animal Crossing, from Animal Crossing to Call of Duty. Additionally, there was also the extraordinary concern from the Marine Corps of conflating military service with shoot-'em-up style first-person shooters. We cannot conflate war and military service with this kind of gamified format. And with that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you again, Representative Tlaib, for hosting this joint special hour, the Progressive Caucus and the Pro-Choice Caucus. It is now my pleasure to yield time to the gentle lady from the great state of New York, the Honorable Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank my esteemed colleague, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashida Tlaib for hosting this week's Special Order Hour on an issue that is so critically important to people and all people who want health care and need equitable access to reproductive health care and justice in the United States. Right now, we are facing a critical juncture in the fight for healthcare and reproductive healthcare in the United States. Louisiana lawmakers designed a law to push abortion out of reach. It compounds the financial barriers of people struggling to make ends meet that they already face when seeking care, including the decades-old Hyde Amendment that has long denied affordable abortion care for low-income people. When I think about this issue, and when any of us think about this issue, we bring our whole selves to the conversation. And when I think about this issue, when I think about the issue of reproductive health care, I bring so much of my experience working in hospitality and restaurants. Working in restaurants is a front line for sexual harassment and sexual assault. And working as a waitress, many of my colleagues were sexually harassed and sexually assaulted. There were days where many of them did not have access to reproductive health care or even prenatal health care. One woman I know was pregnant and had no health care, and she had to show up at free clinics for hours at a hospital, waiting for a new doctor every time. Another friend of mine that I had worked with was in an abusive relationship. And as we all know, reporting rape is a very different issue than accessing reproductive health care in time. And when we impose things like the Hyde Amendment, what we say is that if you are wealthy and have these conditions, you can have access to reproductive health care and an abortion. But if you are poor, you will not be afforded those same issues. That's what the Hyde Amendment is telling the American people. And all people who are capable of being pregnant or know a person or are part of a family of someone who is pregnant. It's incredibly important that we advance and uphold issues of economic and racial justice for all people, regardless of their income and regardless of who they are. And right now, choice is the law of the land. That law should be extended to all people. And there is no reason, none, that a Democratic majority should uphold the Hyde Amendment in the United States. We have to make sure that all people have access to reproductive justice and reproductive health care. And last, but not least, is that these decisions, oftentimes heart-wrenching, are not decisions to be made between a constituent and a legislator. It's a decision to be made between a person and their doctor. And nobody's health care should be up to a senator or their state representative to determine. No less when so many of these bodies are not representative and do not contain people who can become pregnant in them. People do not understand, so many of the people writing these laws do not understand the scope and the breadth that economic and reproductive justice entails. And to that, we have to make sure that we eliminate the Hyde Amendment and allow all people to have access to the reproductive justice and health care that they need. And with that, it is now my pleasure to yield time to the gentleman from the great state of Illinois and my dear
Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield to the gentlewoman from Bronx, New York, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to tell the story of one of my constituents, Yahi Obed. Mr. Obed was born in Yemen and came to the United States when he was 8 years old. His childhood dream was to become a pilot, and he knew and felt that in the United States all things are possible, and his dream could come true. Mr. Obed's dream did come true. He's been a federal employee for 14 years, has 2 children, and a mortgage for his home in the Morris Park neighborhood of the Bronx. He studied hard, got his pilot's license, and is now an air traffic controller supervisor at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City. I spoke with Mr. Obed today over the phone. He and air traffic controllers like him across the country missed their first paycheck this past week. He was telling me about how stressful his job is. Every single day, air traffic controllers have thousands of people's lives in their hands. With weather changes, flight delays, staffing complexities, and a myriad of other issues, their days almost never go exactly to plan. His job is to find solutions, analyze and adapt in real time to keep people safe in one of the busiest airspaces in the United States and the world. And it is terrifying to think that almost every single air traffic controller in the United States is currently distracted at work because they don't know when their next paycheck is coming. Federal workers' jobs are stressful enough. The rise in New York City's cost of living is stressful enough. The fact that Mr. Obed's family cannot be reunified due to fears over the Muslim ban is stressful enough. His several $1,000s a month Bronx mortgage is stressful enough. The anti-immigrant sentiment of this administration is stressful enough. And the truth of this shutdown is that it's actually not about a wall. It is not about the border, and it is certainly not about the well-being of everyday Americans. The truth is, this shutdown is about the erosion of American democracy and the subversion of our most basic governmental norms. It is not normal to hold 800,000 workers' paychecks hostage. It is not normal to shut down the government when we don't get what we want. It is not normal for public servants to run away and hide from the public that they serve. And it is certainly not normal to starve the people we serve for a proposal that is wildly unpopular among the American people. Each and every member of this body has a responsibility to this nation and to everyone in the United States of America, whether they voted for us or not. And this president shares in that responsibility as well, which means he has a responsibility to my constituent, Mr. Obed. President Trump has a responsibility to all air traffic controllers, FDA inspectors, TSA workers, and he has a responsibility to maintain the basic functioning of the United States government. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield my time.